Hey, are you looking for a podcast where you can hear from some of the great hockey legends, hear them tell great stories, and find out what they're up to today? Well, this is it. You're in the right place. It's the Domino's Pizza Overtime Podcast. I'm your host, Gino Retta. Today's guest, the first player in pro hockey history to score 50 goals in 49 games. One of the first Swedes to ever make his way to play hockey in North America. Our friend and Swedish hockey legend, all the way from Stockholm, Sweden, Mr. Anders Hedberg. Anders, so great to touch base with you, my friend. I'm so looking forward to catching up to see what you're up to.
I'm just waiting for this little show out of Toronto, the capital of hockey in the world. No question, Toronto. Even if I have to admit that the passion for the game in Winnipeg, where I lived for 4 years, might be even greater, I have to admit.
Yeah, and I tell you what you did in Winnipeg, I was talking about scoring 50 and 49, which was an incredible milestone when you did that. You did that in the WHA with the then Winnipeg Jets of the WHA. When you made the shift from Sweden to North America, my guess is you had to wonder, how will my game translate? How does my game shift into the North American culture? Did you have any idea you'd be able to do that? I mean, scoring 50 goals in 49 games obviously was unheard of because you did it for the very first time. Did you have any idea you'd be able to bring that kind of skill level to North America's game?
No, I didn't. I had never been in North America because it was sort of a interruption in exchange because of political reasons at that time, and the 6-8 invasion of the Russian into Prague. So I had never been to North America, but I had played against Team Canada 72 on their way over to Russia. They had played 4 games in Canada and then on their way to Russia. And the Swedish national played them here in Stockholm. That's when I said, if this is the best Canada have, and that was the national team, they were from the NHL, except Bobby Hull, I think I'm going to make it in Canada also. But I had promised my parents to finish my education, so I had 2 more years of education in the university, so I had to wait. I couldn't leave. The first Swede, Tommy Bergman, went for Detroit that year, and him and I was discussing with Eagleson at the World Championship. But he went, and he was a little older than me, and I stayed for another 2 years to finish my degree, actually.
You mentioned Bobby Hull, the Golden Jet, one of the greatest goal scorers in NHL history, Hockey Hall of Famer. You played on the line with Bobby Hull and your countryman, Ulf Nilsson, who also made the shift with you in what was ultimately called the Hotline. You guys were virtually unstoppable. And you ended up winning 2, the WHA's version of the Stanley Cup, the AFCO Cup in 1976 and 1978. What was that like? How much did you know about Bobby Hull before you came over here? Because Bobby Hull had already made a tremendous career in the NHL before playing the WHA. What did you know about Bobby Hull coming in, and what was that like to play on a line with one of the greatest goal scorers in NHL history?
Nothing. I had never seen him. And the intentions, and I knew the idea was that me and Ulf were going to play with Bobby. And Ulf and I fitted well together. We knew that. But hey, we've been around. I was 23 at the time. And I played 5 years for the national team. I know you never know who's fitting together. So you can have all kinds of dreams that might not pan out at all. So before Bobby, we went over a little early for training camp, and Bobby was preparing for the 74 WHA team playing the Russians. So we skated at Viscount Gort. It was a private school outside of Winnipeg as a line. And I tell you, Ulf and I looking at each other, and it was a university team, and we made line rushes, but we scored every time. And the antennas were up, and it kind of, Ulf and I would say, we wonder what Bobby's saying. This is unbelievable. We can't work this well. It's impossible. Bobby went back to the guy that had recruited us to Winnipeg. He had been on exchange here and I was a team doctor and former NHL players, Jerry Wilson. Bobby ran home, called Jerry and said, Jerry, this is unbelievable. It can't be this good. What the hell are the Swedes saying? So from the first time we stepped on the ice, it was an incredible connection between us. The way we changed size or delayed or flipped the puck over somebody's stick or had all kinds of interchange that you either it works or it doesn't work. In this case, it was three guys. It was impossible that we would work, but it did. And age-wise, Bobby was 10 years older than me and Ulf. And even in that, emotionally, we were on the same. And I was unbelievable. I have to say, it was unbelievable.
You mentioned briefly Jerry Wilson, and we got to tell this story because the way you ended up coming to North America to play hockey is inconceivable to me. Jerry Wilson, for those, let's give you a bit of a background. He was a Canadian doctor doing research in Sweden back then when you were in school.
Former NHL player also. Former NHL player.
Briefly. His son, Kerry Wilson, played in the league as well. Yeah. Jerry wasn't known as an NHLer. You're right, though. He did have a cup of coffee.
He had to interrupt his career because of injury. Became a doctor instead. Yeah.
Yeah, which is not exactly a bad fallback for a guy. So he's in Stockholm. He's in Stockholm doing some medical research for a paper that he's working on. You're in Stockholm as in school to become a teacher, and the two of you guys meet. Can you tell our audience how the two of you guys came together? Because at that point, you had no intention of being a professional hockey player. You wanted to be a teacher. How did that change the course of your future meeting Jerry Wilson?
Well, I think I knew from playing the Canadian team, the 72 team, and as I said earlier, if this is the best Canada, I think I'm going to make a living out of this too. So at that time, I knew there was a future for me in North America, and I had requests even earlier from Vancouver. I was listed for Toronto. Inge Hammerström and Boris Holming went 73, and if Tommy and Inge and Borje made it, I was confident enough to say, I'm going to make it also.
Good for you. So he's then looking at you. He sees you play. He comes in contact with both yourself and Ulf. And because the Winnipeg Jets had asked them, do us a favor. If you see somebody over there who can play hockey, let us know. And then he made the connection between yourselves and the Winnipeg Jets. How did that conversation go that finally brought you over to North America?
It was a conversation between me, Ulf, and Lars-Erik Sjöberg. That was the third Sweden. He was the captain. He was 7-8 years older than me. 8, 9. He was the captain of the Sweden Nationals. So we together basically said, this looks like a good opportunity. If we're going to make it, we'll make it together in North America. Ulf was listed for Buffalo, Lars-Erik for Minnesota, and I was for Toronto. I could have gone to Toronto. I actually had a better offer from Toronto than Winnipeg. But we said, we'll do it together. And we're going to Winnipeg, actually.
So I didn't know that. So you actually had an offer yourself from the Toronto Maple Leafs and decided to go to Winnipeg.
And they've had Borje and Inge for 1 year at that time. And as I said earlier, if they could make it, I thought I could make it also.
Awesome. And you did make it. I mean, you didn't just do okay. You did really well. You never scored less than 50 goals in your 4 years in the WHA. Matter of fact, in the 1976-77 season, you scored 70 in just 68 games. You won a couple of Avco Cups. Now all of a sudden everybody's talking about you. I remember Glenn Sather, who had this quote about you. He was talking about yourself and Ulf Nilsson and saying that on the line with Bobby Hull, you guys revolutionized the game of hockey. What do you think went into him saying that, and what did that mean to you to hear somebody of Glenn Sather's stature make comments like that?
Well, Glenn, the first year we came, he was a player actually, and then he became the manager and big time in Edmonton.
And very successful.
So we had played against Glenn or I had played against Glenn. He was trying to cover me, and he told me afterwards that was the most difficult assignment he ever had. so, uh, uh, so in that respect, the door was open. And remember, in Winnipeg, we play in the WHA, and we played exhibition games against the some NHL clubs, and we had a 75-80% winning record. Did we play Toronto? Did we play Montreal? No, because they were smart enough not to
Yeah,
challenge us.
you don't want to
Because
expose.
if we had done that, I, Montreal, I'm not sure. Toronto, I would say we would have had a very good chance. And we played. This is the time when the Russians just beat everybody.
Yeah,
They went in and I remember it was a New Year's game against Montreal Canadiens. It was an unbelievable New Year's. It was a tied game, unbelievable. The year after, we played the Russian national team in Winnipeg, beat the Russian nationals 5-3. Nobody else did. It was on only on local television, so it wasn't exposed. And we played the Swedish nationals in Sweden, 75, 76 somewhere. And there was
yeah.
rumors saying, the Swedish media saying, this is not ridiculous. I mean, the club team playing the Swedish nationals. So I remember we Swedes then, and we had the best Swedes. Tommy Bergman was now in Winnipeg. The only ones of the top Swedish players, that was Ing and Borg, they were in Toronto. We told our teammates, guys, we just have to have a hell of a game because they're trying to embarrass us here in Sweden. So we beat the Swedish nationals in a preseason on a bigger ice surface, 6-2, and just blew them away. So we had an unbelievable team. I couldn't say that when we moved to New York, that the team in Winnipeg was better than New York, but it was. And we went to the finals the first year we were in New York. We couldn't say that. I can say it today, but I couldn't say it at that time. We had a great team. We had a very, very, very good team in Winnipeg.
The team was amazing. The hockey fans were amazing. The tremendous support for you guys in the WHA. What wasn't amazing was the cash. You were making about $125,000 a year, which, quite frankly, back in that era was actually pretty good money. But then the Rangers come to you guys. Money. Yeah, but then it's just like crazy money, because then you went from $125,000 a year to $600,000 a year when the Rangers came knocking on the door for both yourself and Ulf Nilsson. What was that like when all of a sudden?
That was the reason, because we were the first unrestricted free agents. There was no Bobby couldn't come with us. He belonged to Chicago. All the other players belonged to other NHL clubs. But us Europeans that had never been drafted, we were, through the lawyer in Winnipeg, our lawyer, Don Baisley, was
legend
working on, and the league actually said, yes, they are unrestricted. They were never drafted. So we became unrestricted free agents. And that's why the salaries in our case then came to that level.
But you also delivered, though, Anders. You guys delivered. What was it like for you to change from, like, Winnipeg was a great hockey market, supported very well, but now you step in to the National Hockey League, and not only to the National Hockey League, but with one of the original 6 teams in the New York Rangers. What was that transition like for you?
How fortunate that Ulf was injured in a totally different manner than in Winnipeg. So we were never able to consistently play. And obviously we didn't have Bobby. And Bobby at that time, Bobby was at the end of his career, regardless, because he was actually 40 years old. So he was at the end. But did we have a left wing in New York as Bobby? No, we didn't. And Ulf was injured. And so we were never able to repeat what we had done, me and Ulf, in New York. games here and game there, but over the period, not even close, not even close. We were fine, but not the same impact at all.
What was it like though, playing in that hockey market in those surroundings at Madison Square Garden in New York? What was that like?
Well, you know what they say in New York, there's only one club, and that is the Rangers, and the fans in New York at that time, I think they were louder at that time, and the ticket prices were less, so the more normal hockey fan could go to the games, and it was always sold out. It was 18,000 every night. They loved it, and so did we. And the player, it was a wonderful time. Absolutely.
You finished your pro career with 855 points through the WHA and the NHL in 751 games. There are only 63 players currently active or retired who have averaged a point per game in their pro careers. That puts you in an unbelievably elite category. What does that mean to you when you hear someone say like something like I just said right now?
Well, it's a compliment, obviously. And I'm confident enough to say I played with the Swedish nationals since I was 18, 19. And I was played 2 Canada Cup, and the last one was 81, and I was the top scorer of Sweden. And I was Sweden, we got some kind of a prize, afterwards. I got mentioned as the top Swedish players 3 out of the 5 games, I think. So yes, from the age of 19 to the age of 30, 31, 32, I was a top 3 forward in Sweden. Am I bragging now? Maybe, probably not. And I was confident enough, and I knew I saw the ice well enough. I was a terrific skater. I was not afraid. I was not a tough guy, but I certainly wasn't afraid. We had no shit. If we were afraid, go home. Yeah. And so they couldn't intimidate me in an area of intimidation. And I played against all the best players. Russia, Canada, US, Czech Republic, you name it. So I had a pretty good feeling where would I fit in. And I'm not saying I should be in that level as you just mentioned, but I was a good player at least.
Get ready for the game with the Domino's $8.99 mix and match deal. Score big with any medium 2-topping pizza and any 2 items like pastas, stuffed cheesy bread, boneless chicken, or classic chicken wings. Domino's has you covered. Order today from Canada's favorite pizza at domino's.ca. Let me ask you this, and I love your confidence, and rightfully so, because your numbers, show that. In 1997, you were inducted into the International Ice Hockey Hall of Fame. Because, like you say, you're one of the all-time greatest Swedes to ever play the game, playing on the Swedish national team, putting together incredible numbers at the WHL level and in the NHL level as well. But it hasn't happened yet for you for the Hockey Hall of Fame, which we should point out, the Hockey Hall of Fame is not based only on what happens in the NHL. The Hockey Hall of Fame is not the NHL Hall of Fame. The Hockey Hall of Fame is based on what you do in international hockey and in professional hockey and the multiple levels you are. What is your feeling about not being inducted to this point in the Hockey Hall of Fame?
In that respect, first of all, I'm sitting on the selection committee of the Hockey Hall of Fame. Oh. So it's a very sensitive, but I would say that in a sense, it's a mirror of that the Hockey Hall of Fame. It's not the European. It's not in the IHF's Hockey Hall of Fame. It's not the WHA. It's not the Winnipeg. It is an NHL Hockey Hall of Fame, and I didn't have
But
an
it's not
NHL.
supposed to be Anders. It's not
But I
supposed to
mean,
be
it
the
is,
NHL
it
hockey
is, it is, it is. Um, so in that respect, I'm not I'm not a real strong candidate. I probably have been this candidate, not as long as I've been on the selection committee, but at one point, but now I'm getting too old anyhow to be inducted to the Hockey Hall of Fame. I'm inducted to the International, the Sweden, and in Winnipeg. That's good enough for me.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I don't know. I just it because I think I'm with you that too many times we've turned the Hockey Hall of Fame into the NHL Hall of Fame, but because of the induction of women, because of the way that we've looked at international players in the last few years specifically, I think it opens things up to say you're one of the best of all time in the game, not necessarily a long career in the NHL, but in the game.
In that respect, say you have a couple of Russian players that are in my age, Khalamov and Yakushev and Trechak. They are inducted. They're not inducted. They're inducted because they played very, very well against Canada in the 74, 72 and 74 series. And also,
but not for what they did in the NHL.
No, because they didn't play in NHL. No. So sure, there is call it discrimination, but that's not the right word. A backside. If I had moved to Toronto when I moved to Winnipeg and had the same, and would have been the same player, no question. I would say yes, I would have been inducted to the Hall of Fame.
Wow. And you can make a good point for that. I'll tell you what, you can make a good point for that. You were a groundbreaker. You were also a groundbreaker after you retired. After you retired from the Rangers, Rangers GM Craig Patrick asked you to become an assistant GM with him, and then you became the first European to get a front office job with an NHL team. What did that mean to you?
Because I mean, as I said, hockey, I loved the game, still love the game. Hopefully, Craig thought that I was intelligent enough and interested enough, and I had the international connections too. And you mentioned Glenn Sather here. Every time I've kind of been out of work, I've had a phone call from Glenn Sather first in Edmonton and then in New York.
Yeah.
So I guess I brought something to the game and an angle to the game and an outlook to the game that was a little different than the traditional North American guy, I would say.
And you also had a great eye for the game. You had a tremendous amount. There are a lot of people who are maybe watching this podcast or listening to the podcast right now who may go, Anders Hedberg, yeah, I remember him. A great scout. Yeah, you had a tremendously successful time as a scout as well. You were a scout from, I think, 91 to 97. You worked as a scout for the Toronto Maple Leafs, ultimately became an assistant GM with them, working with Ken Dryden for a couple of years as well. Do you think you had a special eye for recognizing young talent, especially over in Europe? Or do you think you just had better access because people trusted you more? What do you think made you so successful as a scout looking for young hockey talent?
Well, first of all, you have to be interested in the game and the call it the finesse of the game. What's really difficult? Where do you really have to have the mind and the skills and the hands and the legs to and the courage to play this game? And that has nothing to do with nationalities, because if you were born in British Columbia or if you're born in Chelyabinsk in Russia, and you have a totally different background and you really play the game or not? And can you function together with others? Because it's team sports. It's not an individual sport. It really is a team sport.
But Anders, there's a lot of people who are able to play the game really well who don't understand how to assess talent. That's a different skill entirely.
I'm not so sure about that. If you really study the game, and I have to admit, when I was 28, and because I was in phys ed, then the next would have been sort of a coach, and then at 28, I was now either in Winnipeg or on my way to New York. I said, gee, I don't know one coach 50 years and older that still are together with their families. So at that time, I decided I'm not going to be a coach. I'm going to be somebody in the front office or scouting or evaluating player, building teams. So my whole thinking after 28 wasn't training. I knew how to train, and I was well prepared. I tell you, I was really well prepared because I knew how to train. But at that time, I started sitting on the bench and thinking about players of who fits together, what's personalities, what nationality, why do these guys fit together? They shouldn't, but they do, and try to analyze. So I started 28 to 35 when I finished. I had actually 7 years of studying time of why things work together or people work together.
Yeah. You had a great run also as a director of player personnel with the Ottawa Senators from 02 to 07. You were the head of European scouting for the Rangers in 07 after that.
I was head of the Swedish national program for 3 years, actually.
That's what I want to get to.
Yeah.
While you had all that experience in North America, you also got a chance. I think was it 2000, the year 2000? You went back.
Yeah.
The GM of the Swedish national team. What did it mean to you to be able to? You talk about the fact that the importance of family, like players and people who travel a lot with NHL teams. Oftentimes we see a lot of pressure put on the family. But you got a chance to go back home to Sweden, to be in your native country, to speak your native language, to go back and say thank you to all the people of an organization, a system that was very, very good to you, in which you were very, very successful. And you had a chance to run them in 2000 as the GM of the Swedish national team. What was that like for you?
Fortunately, in the Olympics in Salt Lake, we had beaten Canada, and eventually they ended up taking the gold medals, but we lost to Belarus.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I can't. I have. Sorry, you brought it up. I have not been able to watch that game in afterwards. It hurts. It hurts so much because we had a hell of a team. We had Sundin. We had Lidström. Peter Forsberg was injured, unfortunately, but we had a hell of a team. Beat Canada in the opening rounds. So I think the story would have been different. Go back. The reason then I went to Ottawa, but hey, I am still married to the same girl that I met in high school. I have 3 kids. They're all well educated, doing fine. You have 7 grandchildren, and I couldn't justify to bring them over to either Toronto or Ottawa because they were doing fine in their own development, and my wife was doing fine in her professional. So I had to move back to Sweden, actually. You know what? I'm very happy. We're very fortunate. Very fortunate. I am very fortunate.
Tremendous success as an individual. You had a tremendous success in the career that you chose, and you're even more successful as a family man. So there's a lot to be said to that. And I it's been so great catching up with you. Anders, before I let you go, we do something we call 5 fast facts. I'm going to ask you 5 quick questions, and you give me 5 quick answers. The first thing that comes to your mind on that. Okay? You ready to do that?
All right. Yeah, absolutely. Right.
Time now for 5 fast facts with the first player in pro hockey history to score 50 in 49 games, Swedish hockey legend Anders Hedberg. Anders, who was the best teammate that you ever played with?
Nils Nicke Johansson, 10-year-old defenseman in my home club, Modo.
Wow. Who was the best coach you ever played for?
Could be Fred Shero, actually, in New York.
A legend in and of himself.
Mhm.
Who did you hate playing against the most and why?
I probably hated to play against Bobby Clark the most. At the same time, we're good friends today. We met many times. Have a wonderful. He actually tried to recruit me as an executive. Great respect for him, but I have to say I fucking hated to play against him. He was a dirty son of a bitch. Well, on the ice.
I don't blame you. I've heard that a lot, actually. After
Yeah.
all your success in your career on and off the ice, what is the one piece of advice you would give yourself? You go back and speak to your 15-year-old self. What advice would you have said to yourself?
The game. Just love the game, but treat it with respect and train and train and train. Be first on the ice and last on the ice and love the game.
One last question for you. If you hadn't become a professional hockey player, what career do you think you would have had instead?
I think my father was an engineer. My brother became a doctor. I think I would have been somewhere in between, doctor engineering.
That's
Because I would have had a degree, that's for sure. Absolutely.
Anders, thank you so much for all of this. I appreciate it. It's been so nice catching up with you, and you look really healthy, and it looks like things are going well for you. I couldn't be happier for you, my friend. Thank you so much.
Very good. Thank you for having me on. Thank you.
The first player in pro hockey history to score 50 in 49, double IHF Hockey Hall of Famer, Swedish hockey legend, Anders Hedberg. The Overtime Podcast is proudly presented by Domino's Pizza and Athlete's Care. Whether you're hitting the ice with the team or watching the big game at home, Domino's has got you covered. You can score big with medium, two-topping pizzas, pastas, stuffed cheesy bread, boneless chicken, or classic chicken wings with the $8.99 Domino's Mix and Match deal. Any two items for only $8.99. Grab a couple of game winners from Canada's favorite pizza at Domino's.ca. Athlete's Care is proud to be celebrating its 26th year, offering sports medicine services to both elite athletes and the general population who require rehab for a new or chronic injury or pain. Go to where the best go. Athlete's Care Sports Medicine Clinics with 24 locations in the Greater Toronto Area and Ottawa. Hey, if you missed any parts of the show, don't worry. Visit our website at overtimepodcast.ca, where you can both listen and subscribe to future shows. The Domino's Pizza Overtime Podcast can be found on Spotify, iTunes Podcast, or any of your favorite podcast platforms. As well, please check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel at O-Time Podcast. Until next week, I'm Gino Reda saying so long, hockey fans, and thanks for joining us on the Domino's Overtime Podcast.